The year is the early 13th century, somewhere on the wide-open steppe of Central Asia. There are no highways, no power lines, no satellites overhead that anyone on the ground could understand. Just grass, wind, dust, and the sound of thousands of horses moving across the plain. And at the center of it all is one of the most dangerous armies in human history, the Mongol army. This is not a slow medieval force dragging itself across the map. This is an army built for speed. Mongol horsemen can ride for days, change direction without warning, split into separate columns, disappear over the horizon, and then come back from 3 different directions before their enemy even understands what is happening. They are archers, scouts, raiders, and conquerors. They use fake retreats, ambushes, encirclement, and psychological terror better than almost anyone before them. Cities that think they are safe behind walls learn very quickly that the Mongols do not fight like normal armies. Now imagine that this army, maybe 80,000 to 100,000 riders strong, is moving across the steppe toward its next target. But this time, something is waiting for them. Not a walled city, not a line of spearmen, not a rival cavalry force. Sitting low on the horizon, hidden behind earthworks and camouflage nets, is a small, modern fire base built around one of the most famous weapons of the 21st century, HIMARS, a handful of launch vehicles, a drone team, modern radios, ground radar, armored vehicles guarding the outer perimeter, fuel trucks, ammunition containers, and a small group of soldiers who know exactly what is coming. The Mongols have spent their lives fighting enemies they can see. This enemy can hit them from beyond the horizon. So what actually happens when Genghis Khan's cavalry rides into the range of a modern HIMARS battery? The first thing to understand is that HIMARS is not impressive because it looks huge. It does not look like a castle. It does not look like an army. It does not even look as terrifying as a modern tank column. A HIMARS launcher is basically a truck with a rocket system mounted on the back. But that is exactly what makes it so dangerous. It can move fast, it can stop, fire, and move again. Depending on the rockets being used, it can strike targets from many miles away with a level of accuracy that would make no sense to a medieval commander. It does not need to see the target with human eyes. It can receive coordinates, fire-guided rockets, and hit a location long before the enemy has any idea where the launch came from. And in this scenario, the HIMARS battery is not alone. A drone is already in the air, watching the Mongol army from far above. The operators can see the dust clouds first, then the columns, then the separate groups of horsemen spread across the plain. What looks like chaos from the ground is actually very organized from above. There are forward scouts, main cavalry formations, spare horses, supply, animals, command groups protected near the center, messenger riders moving between wings of the army. The Mongols are not careless. That matters. They are not just charging blindly across the grass. Their scouts are ahead of the main body. Their commanders are experienced. Their entire way of war is based on seeing the enemy before the enemy sees them. But this time, they have already lost that contest. The modern fire base sees them first. Inside the command vehicle, the drone feed is being studied in real time. The Mongol army is still far away, still moving in marching order, still not fully deployed for battle. To the riders on the ground, the day probably feels normal. Another march. Another target ahead. Another enemy waiting somewhere in the distance. Then the first launch happens. To the Mongols, it would not look like a bow shot. It would not look like a catapult. It would not look like Greek fire or a siege engine or anything their world has ever produced. Somewhere far beyond their sight, rockets rise into the sky. A few moments later, the steppe in front of them erupts. The first impacts land near a dense section of the marching column. Horses panic, riders are thrown. Dust and smoke roll across the grass. Men who have spent their entire lives around war suddenly face something that does not fit any category they know. There was no enemy line, no volley of arrows, no visible siege machine, no warning, just explosions arriving from the sky. The first strike would be devastating, but the confusion might be even worse than the casualties. Mongol commanders would react quickly. That is one of the reasons they were so successful. They would not simply freeze, they would send riders outward. They would spread the formation. They would try to locate the source of the attack. They would assume at first that there must be a hidden enemy nearby. That is the correct instinct for their world. It is also completely wrong for this one. The HIMARS battery is not sitting on the next hill waiting to be surrounded. It is miles away, possibly already moving to a new firing position. The drone is still watching. The command team can see the Mongols begin to scatter into smaller groups, and that creates the next decision. Do they strike the densest formations? Do they hit the command group? Do they target the spare horse herds? Do they hit river crossings, narrow paths, or areas where movement is forced into a tight space? This is where the fight becomes deeply unfair. The Mongols are masters of movement, but modern targeting turns movement into information. Every dust trail, every turn, every mass of riders becomes something that can be tracked. The faster the army tries to reorganize, the more patterns it creates. A second rocket attack lands, this time not on the front riders, but deeper into the formation. Then another. The Mongol army begins to understand that distance does not protect them in the way it always had. Their greatest strength has always been mobility. But mobility only works when the enemy has to chase you, see you, or guess where you are going. The drone does not get tired. The rockets do not care how fast a horse can run. And the fire base does not have to accept battle on Mongol terms. That is the real shock. The Mongols are used to controlling the rhythm of war. They decide when to appear, when to retreat, when to surround, when to break contact, and when to return. Against slower armies, that is almost unbeatable. But HIMARS changes the rhythm completely. Now the Mongols are being hit before they can close. They are being watched before they can scout. They are being forced to react to an enemy they cannot see, cannot reach, and cannot easily understand. This does not mean the Mongols are stupid. In fact, the opposite is true. A weaker army might simply collapse. A Mongol army would start adapting. They would spread out farther. They would stop moving in large visible groups. They would travel at night. They would send small scout teams in every direction. They would use prisoners, local guides, and terrain knowledge to search for the hidden source of the fire. They would test the weapon. They would try to learn its limits. And that is where the story becomes more interesting. Because HIMARS is powerful, but it is not magic. It needs ammunition. It needs fuel. It needs maintenance. It needs secure communications. It needs people to operate it. It needs protection while reloading and moving. Most importantly, it cannot fire forever. A small HIMARS force could cause catastrophic damage in the first hours of the encounter. It could destroy large formations, break up attacks, and make any direct charge across open ground almost suicidal. But against 80,000 or 100,000 Mongol riders, the question is not just how powerful the first strike is. The question is how long the modern force can keep doing it. Every rocket fired is one less rocket available later. Every drone flight uses battery life or fuel. Every vehicle movement risks being spotted by scouts. Every hour that passes gives the Mongols more time to understand that the invisible enemy is not a god. It is a system. And systems have edges. The Mongols would not need to destroy HIMARS in a fair fight. They would just need to find it, pressure it, exhaust it, or force it to move at the wrong time. They could send small groups across a massive area, accepting losses to map out where the attacks are coming from. They could avoid tight formations and make each rocket less valuable. They could use darkness, bad weather, terrain, and pure numbers to stretch the firebase's attention. And if even one large cavalry force got close enough to the support vehicles, the situation would change fast. A HIMARS launcher is not a fortress. The soldiers defending it have modern weapons, and they would be terrifying at close range, but they are still a small force. They cannot be everywhere at once. They cannot hold an endless perimeter against an enemy that can attack from multiple directions over miles of open land. So the first day belongs completely to the modern side. There is no realistic way for the Mongols to understand HIMARS quickly enough to avoid terrible losses at the beginning. Their command structure would be shaken. Their horses would panic. Their formations would break apart. Their normal tactics would fail because the enemy refuses to play by the rules of their century. But after that first day, the battle changes. It stops being a simple question of modern weapon versus medieval army. It becomes a contest between technology and adaptation. Can the HIMARS battery keep enough distance, enough ammunition, and enough awareness to keep breaking the Mongol army apart? Or can the Mongols do what they did so many times in history, study the enemy, find the weakness, spread out, endure the losses, and turn the battlefield into something the other side did not plan for? By the end of the first night, the steppe would be quiet again. Fires would burn where horse columns once moved. Survivors would regroup miles away. Mongol scouts would be out in the dark, searching for tracks, engine noise, strange lights, anything that points back to the source of the destruction. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the HIMARS crews would be reloading, checking drone feeds, counting rockets, and realizing the same thing Xerxes, Rome, China, and half the medieval world once learned. The Mongols are not easy to finish. The opening strike would be a massacre, but the real battle would begin after the Mongols survived long enough to start learning.